How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk, and today I want to talk about gun control, or actually preventing gun violence. However you want to word it, each way will actually signify, I believe, something that we all would agree with, whether you're on the extreme right or the extreme left. Today I'm going to actually focus on the term preventing gun violence, but I know some people will think that it's actually another term for gun control, which is fine. Both of them actually mean the same thing, and today my guest is here to help me figure out a middle ground towards gun control or preventing gun violence. She is my preventing gun violence specialist, Avery Gardiner. Avery Gardiner, first off, I know you're extremely busy. I know you got a lot of stuff going on right now, especially in the wake of the Las Vegas shooting. So I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me and as well as talk to my audience. So thank you.
I'm really happy to be here.
You know, a week ago, we had the incident in Las Vegas. We had a mass shooting, over 58 dead, over 500 injured. And of course, we're going to go back and wonder, could we have done anything different? And of course, right now, I think a lot of people are blinded by what I call hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is basically, we have more information right now, and we're using it to judge the information that we didn't know then. So basically, we're looking for things that we may have overlooked before, but that's because we know to look for these things. Sounds complicated, but it's what we call Monday night quarterbacking. And we're looking for preventive measures. Could things have been different? Could this have been prevented? And I want to start with that first. So Avery, let me just ask you a question, because that was a question I believe that you were cut off on when I saw you on Fox, and I believe that you had a great response with this. And he asked you, could this incident been prevented? And I want to get your opinion on that. Could this incident have been prevented?
Well, we actually don't know enough yet to know whether this incident could be prevented, could have been prevented. We don't know how the shooter acquired all of his guns. We don't know whether he had any illegal equipment with him. It seems that, at least what we do know today, he did comply with at least many of the laws on the books. But it's just the wrong question to be asking. We shouldn't be focused on what could we have done to stop this horrible tragedy in Vegas. But instead, I want to focus on what can we do to stop the next shooting in America. And that's where we really ought to be focused on in terms of our solutions, whether they're a legislative solution or a law enforcement solution or a courtroom solution or just a different kind of conversation in this country. That's where I want us to be focused on, because that's how we make progress. That's how we can save lives.
And you know what? Being in law enforcement myself, I believe in universal precaution, which I believe that sometimes you got to do what you can to prevent, because in order to do that, you'll be able to save lives. But the argument here is your idea of prevention. Does that mean that you're looking to take away the weapons from lawful, abiding citizens?
No. At the Brady Campaign, which of course was founded in the aftermath of the shooting of a very prominent Republican, Jim Brady, serving Ronald Reagan. At Brady, we are not at all focused, nor do we want to take guns away from law-abiding Americans. We're very much focused on how do we keep guns out of the hands of criminals, and also how do we make sure that the people who lawfully have guns are storing them and using them in ways that help keep the people around them safe.
And let me ask you a question. Why do people believe that there is a move from the left side to remove weapons from lawful owners?
That idea got rooted somehow years and years ago, and I don't quite understand why, because it's just not the case, not what we're looking to do. I think that there has been a failure on the part of people in the gun violence prevention movement to really make sure that we've been talking to gun owners, that we've been talking to conservatives, that we've been talking to hunters, that we've been talking to people who choose to have guns for self-protection. Because without understanding what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're afraid of, I don't see how we can make a lot of progress.
Right, and you know what's funny? The things that you mentioned, I don't think people on either side would disagree. I don't disagree with a good, tight background check. I know that's been a discussion that people kind of lean away from. But if you ask most of the people that I hang around with, you're going to want people that have been vetted, because you don't want to add danger to society as it is. So I understand about the universal background check. So in your opinion, what should that background check entail?
So the first thing, the most important thing, is if we're going to have a good background check system, then everybody buying a gun has to go through that background check. We've got to close the loopholes that allow people to buy guns online or from private sellers in other formats. It does doesn't make any sense to me that we treat people who are buying guns at licensed gun stores differently than people who are buying them, for example, on websites that offer tens of thousands of guns for sale at any given time in America. So it starts with making sure that the background check covers everyone who is trying to buy a gun. And, almost all the time, the background check comes back with an answer in less than 10 minutes. So this is not something that's going to make it really difficult or cumbersome or time-consuming for someone who's lawfully permitted to buy guns to buy them. So that would be the first thing I would do. The next thing we have to do is make sure that the database where we run these checks from has good information in it. So as your audience knows, probably better than I do, every state in America has its own system for recording criminal convictions. There are differences in every state about how we track who has a restraining order against them for domestic violence. And there are very different records across the nation in how we track people who've been involuntarily committed to mental institutions. Those are some of the criteria that go into the background check system. And if we don't have good data in the system, then running the background check isn't going to be as effective as it could be. So those would be the first two things I would start with. Make sure that we're covering all the gun sales, and make sure that the background check system has the right data in it so that we can get the answers out of it that will be accurate.
And it's in my opinion, the stuff that you're asking, the criteria that must be met, I don't think anybody from my side would argue that. I mean, you're looking at someone who could possibly have been a felon, someone that may have a mental health history, and if we ask ourselves, do we want people having those weapons? Of course, my side's going to say, no way. So at that point, obviously, we have that agreement. And also, I noticed when I was watching the interview you had with Tucker Carlson, he mentioned a lot about, if we put laws on the books, it's still not going to stop the criminals from retaining the weapon. And I want to add a comment to that. I agree with that 100%. People are going to find their ways to get what they want. Trust me, I work in a correction facility. We can lock down the prison all day and drugs are going to still find their way in. But having said that, if we don't do nothing, then what happens is, one thing, it makes it easier. But second thing is, if we don't put laws on the books and they do get their hands on a weapon, we can't prosecute them because they haven't broken any laws. So when we're looking at laws to be added for gun control or gun violence prevention, are we looking to also add laws in regards to sentencing those who are caught with an unlawful weapon?
So I agree with a lot of what you just said there in terms of the common sense solutions that we need to be focused on. The first question that I keep hearing people talk about a lot is, well, no law could stop every act of violence. And that's right. But just because we can't solve the problem 100% doesn't mean we oughtn't to try to solve part of it. So, to me, I think about drunk driving checkpoints. Drunk driving checkpoints don't catch all drunk drivers. They don't stop all car accidents. But they're a sensible step in trying to reduce the number of people who drive drunk and kill other people. That's what we need to do here. We need a system that focuses on saving as many lives as we can. And if there are some that we aren't able to save through sensible laws, well, let's just do our best. So that would be the first thing I'd say. We don't need to have a complete, comprehensive solution to every part of the gun violence epidemic in this country to make forward progress in saving lives, and that's where we should be focused. Now, your question on sentencing is also a really interesting one. And I'm trained as a lawyer, and I was chief legal officer at my organization before I became the co-president. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how we enforce the laws once we put them on the books. And we have to be thinking about how we sentence people for illegal firearm possession. I heard a story recently about a police officer who was shot in the line of duty in Milwaukee. He and his partner interrupted an armed burglary, and one of the suspects took off on foot. He gave chase, and the robber wound up shooting the police officer. The robber was then killed and returned fire, and it turned out that the person who shot the police officer was in fact a felon, and he was not legally permitted to purchase or possess a firearm. So the police started looking into how he got his gun. And turned out that he had his girlfriend buy it for him a couple of weeks earlier. They went to a gun store together. He helped her fill out the background check paperwork, and we have videotape of him handing her the cash to pay for the gun. She was prosecuted for her role in that, as she should be. That's called straw purchasing, and it's a violation of federal law. But at the sentencing time, she got a plea deal. She was sentenced to 4 days and given credit for time served. Now, I don't know all of the circumstances of that prosecution or all of the reasons that the prosecutor decided to give her that deal. So I don't want to criticize the specifics there because I don't know enough to do that and it wouldn't be fair. But we got to ask some questions. If somebody buys a gun illegally for a felon boyfriend who uses it to shoot at a police officer on duty, shouldn't we be thinking about a penalty that's more than 4 days with credit for time served already?
I agree with you 100% because, see, that tends to be an issue now where you had movements to lessen sentences, to empty out the prisons because we're kind of in desperation mode, money, the numbers of staff to inmate ratio. And now, unfortunately, there are certain laws we want to enforce, and I think that if we are to push for gun control laws, we can't forget the fact that prosecuting people who violate those laws have to be serious and consistent. We can't just pick and choose.
I agree. It has to be serious and consistent. And there's another part we need to do too. When we look at the data, we see that 90% of the guns recovered at crime scenes come from only 5% of the country's licensed gun dealers. So 5% of our gun dealers are the original source of 90% of the crime guns in this country. And I find that shocking. What's happening is that most gun dealers operate incredibly responsibly. They are trying very hard to follow the law. They're trying very hard to make sure that the people they're selling guns to are not dangerous and are not going to hurt themselves or others. That's the vast majority of gun dealers in this country. But there's a small number who are not. There's a small number who are skirting the law or flat out breaking the law in an effort to make a buck. And when they sell guns in violation of the law, and those guns are used to hurt people, those gun dealers have a responsibility and they should be held accountable too. They can be held accountable in court through civil cases, and also the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which is the federal agency that licenses gun dealers, has a role to play in inspecting them and making sure they're operating safely. Why would we let the 5% of gun dealers who are selling 90% of the crime guns get away with it without any questions asked at all about their procedures?
And you know what's funny? This is why I wanted to have you on the show, because this is the dialogue I felt that you didn't get a chance to express, and I felt that my audience, who I believe to be a very educated audience, would agree with. I don't think anybody in their right mind would disagree with what you're saying. I think the arguments at this point are just so far, but the concern that my audience had, and it was messaged me when they knew I was doing this show, was slippery slope. So what they're afraid of is that once the door is opened, that starts putting these effects into play, which so far I agree with them. I agree with the background checks, the stricter sentences, making sure that we can try to do the best we can to prevent. Again, nothing's 100%, and we know that. And but we're trying to make an effort, like a universal precaution. In law enforcement, we define our career on universal precaution. But for the people that are worried about slippery slope, what's your thoughts on that?
I guess I have a bunch of thoughts on that, and I am sympathetic to the legitimate concern that people have that somebody wants to come take guns away from law-abiding people, but that concern is frankly misplaced. So let me give you an example. Machine guns have been in the news a lot in the last couple of weeks because the shooter in Las Vegas seems to have used an accessory that converted his gun to the functional equivalent of a machine gun. So starting about 80 plus years ago, we started regulating machine guns pretty strictly. And there are careful controls about not making any new ones and about what you have to do if you want to transfer one that existed before the new laws went into place. And you know what? Since the machine gun laws have been in place, we haven't seen that slippery slope. We haven't slid down it since that happened. So we have experience here finding ways to make appropriate compromises and restrictions on very dangerous types of weapons of war, and then was a way to make it work for us, we don't have to slide down that slope. You know, it's also kind of like thinking about prescription drugs. We require that people get prescriptions for some kinds of medicines in this country. You could argue that that's a slippery slope, leading to requiring a prescription anytime you want to buy a bottle of Advil. But it hasn't happened, right? I can still go get my bottle of Advil. I just need a prescription in order to get something that's stronger and needs to be more carefully restricted. So I understand that people have a real fear about it, but I think that fear is misplaced because there are lots of things that we regulate in part in this country in order to keep us all safer and have the kind of community we want. And we don't have the experience as Americans of having it quickly devolve into the government taking all of our liberty away from us. It's not what I want, it's not what you want, it's not what your listeners want, but I don't think that's where we're heading on this issue.
Right, and to be honest with you, you weren't given a chance to explain that perspective when you were on the Fox show, and that got me upset because I knew when they were doing the interview there was much more that you had to offer that I just couldn't get from that interview. So I thank God you took the chance to come on my show. And one of the questions he asked was, we just talked about people are afraid that you're going to take away that right, and you basically said no, we're not looking to do that, which is great. And then you just explained the slippery slope because my audience would be afraid that if we open that door, where does that door go from there? But there's another concern too, and I believe that my audience will relate to this too, is just like anything else, like a car, that we get registered and we have to prove that we have to be able to drive it. I mean, do you feel that maybe there should be something done with weapons to test a person to see if they're proficient before purchasing a weapon, and also maybe like law enforcement does to requalify with that weapon maybe once a year, or I know police, most of them do it twice a year, but maybe at least once a year to prove that you're still proficient with that weapon?
I think that there's so much else we could do first, but that's a discussion that we aren't ready to have yet. When we think about the law and what the law requires, I think it is a conversation that your listeners could really help us with.
Okay, so again, Avery, I apologize. I didn't mean to jump ahead. So before we even test to see if people are proficient, what should we be doing first?
So there are a couple of things I think we ought to be doing. First, if we're talking about somebody applying for a concealed carry permit to carry a gun with them all over town, I think it is reasonable for us to be thinking about, at this point, whether they should have to demonstrate that they've been through some training and have some proficiency with a gun. If they're going to be carrying it in their purse or concealed on their person everywhere they go around town, I think exactly what you talk about in terms of making sure that they're qualified and educated about the use of that gun has a lot of sense to it. But I'm not sure that outside of the arena of concealed carry permits that we need to be regulating it and legislating it quite yet. I think instead, your audience could do a great service to this country by raising their voices in conversation with their friends and neighbors and churchgoers about, hey, if you choose to have a gun, you need to make sure that you know how to use it safely. And that I, as a law enforcement officer, do require training and proficiency exams. And I think that's important. And I make sure that I go to the range periodically and practice. And I make sure that I'm storing my gun safely at home and that I reassess that from time to time. Like, for example, if I have grandchildren coming over to visit, how am I storing my guns? And am I making sure that they're not easily accessible to young children if they're loaded? So those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having with people who choose to own guns. Because a lot of people in law enforcement and in corrections, veterans, others who are very comfortable around guns, they can do a lot to help people make sure that they are treating those weapons with respect and with the care that can help keep all of us safer. Does that make sense?
No, I agree 100% because the people in my field, when we go to the academy, we're taught those things. We're taught how to safely store the weapon. We're taught how to, obviously be proficient with the weapon, but what you said as the preventive measures, we're taught how to safely store that weapon. And if something was to happen with that weapon, let's say a toddler gets a hold of it and shoots another child or an adult, there's negligence to that and there's serious criminal charges that will be placed on the owner. So at this point, there is zero tolerance in regards to how that weapon is handled, especially in the household. And I think that maybe it would be good if we can make that universal, so anybody that chooses to purchase a weapon, they kind of go through the same procedures that we as law enforcement professionals do. Because I guarantee you, because of the liability of owning a weapon, law enforcement does what it can to make sure that we alleviate that liability by training people, retraining them, and making sure they know what comes with the responsibility of owning a weapon. So I don't think that should be different between law enforcement and the public owning a weapon. I think they should be held to the same standards. So everything you're saying so far is in line with some of the practice we already do, just not on a universal level. So basically what you're looking to do is maybe take what we've already done, law enforcement wise, and maybe see how we can get that to the community of gun holders.
Absolutely right. You know, a couple of days before the Vegas tragedy, I read about a shooting in Michigan that happened at an in-home daycare. And at least according to the news story I read, a child in the daycare got his hands on a loaded handgun and shot 2 3-year-olds who were also at the daycare. That was entirely preventable. Those 2 little boys did not need to get shot that day. But somebody, based on the news story, didn't store a gun appropriately. The other thing I'd mention here is I sometimes hear a lot of people saying, well, we need to teach children to respect guns and not to touch them. And you know, they're right. And I talk to my children about not going over to play with guns and to make sure that they can't do that unless there's an adult who's watching them and supervising them, who knows what they're doing. But we've done research on this. And it turns out that children are just so naturally curious that no matter how much training you give them, no matter how many times you say, if you see a handgun, don't touch it, go get your mom or dad, they're just drawn to them. And we need to be putting that responsibility on the adults, not on the children. And that's why I really do encourage people in your audience group to have conversations with their friends and neighbors and their family members about, hey, if I'm bringing my kids over to your house, how do you store your guns? Not that I don't want to come over to your house, I do, but I want to make sure that if you've got guns in the home and my kid is coming over to play, that the gun is stored in a way that's safe, that's not going to put anybody at risk. And having those kinds of conversations in our society really can make a difference. 8 or 9 kids are shot every day in this country. That's really far too many. But I think that there are things we can do short of laws even. There's these conversations about being a responsible gun owner that law enforcement and corrections officers and veterans can really help us advance.
And you know what? I think that's something we'd be willing to help out with, because we believe that a lot of the times we're left out of the major discussions, the frontline people that have the most experience, the ones that may be immediate to the affected area of change. You know, so I think it's great that we have the middle road, because then you're getting people that are affected talking about what they can do, and now you're also getting them to be part of the plan, so they see the teamwork aspect, they want to succeed, and this is discussion that they're left out of, and they get offended. I mean, trust me, they don't want these decisions made by politicians. They want these decisions made by them and then bring it to the politicians, because again, these changes are affecting them the most. So the fact that you're willing to open up a dialogue with these professionals, I haven't heard one network even discuss that yet. So again, I'm sure I can get my people to you maybe after the show. We can discuss certain ways where we can maybe meet with you guys, go down there and discuss what we feel would help out. I mean, just by this dialogue alone, we learned a lot. But real quick, we have to come to a close soon, because the show, it's only 28 minutes. But we're not done. I would like to have Avery on again, because there's a couple of things else I want to discuss. I want to talk about, in the future, if this is okay, I want to talk about the steps you must go through when you purchase a weapon, if you want to make any changes towards that. I also want to talk about federal standards to track a weapon. And I also want to talk about buying a gun from a private owner. I didn't get a chance to discuss that today. So what I'm hoping to do is, if I can schedule maybe sometime next week, if you're not so busy, I would like to cover those 3 topics. But for a closing, I want to give us a chance to close. This is a chance for middle ground. And I'm tired of the left and right, because unfortunately when we deal with the left and right, it really doesn't give us the road of compromise, which is basically what America's built on. America's built on the road of compromise. So in closing, if I may, Avery, how do you feel about these middle ground discussions? And outside of that question, is there anything you'd like to say to my audience before we close?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. This is great, and I want to come back and have more of these conversations.
Yes.
Second, you know, the crazy thing is that this is an issue that has the most bipartisan support of any in America. 90% of Americans think that we should have a stronger background check system. and that includes 80% of Republicans and 70% of NRA members. So we already have a consensus. We need to make sure that our politicians are hearing our voices and that we continue these kinds of constructive dialogues that can move us forward instead of everybody backing into their corner and sniping at each other, which just doesn't do a whole lot to move things forward.
But that's what has to be done. And that's why it's good to have these constructive dialogue, and I'm hoping to do it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to you next week. We'll find a day that works best for you, whatever you choose, and we'll go ahead and we'll make the show happen, because I still want to discuss these other issues. But in the meantime, just to take from the end of the conversation again, this is to my audience here in closing, look what we did so far, and I believe we're in agreement with this, with some of the things they want, the extensive background checks, the sentences for those that violate the gun laws that we put into effect. We wouldn't be against that. We don't want the guns going into the hands of felons, but again, universal precaution, which is something that we need to act on, correct? We're law enforcement. We believe in universal precaution. So even though nothing's 100%, nothing can be guaranteed. No one can guarantee anything. There's no catch-all solution for life because things change. Different situations occur. But at the end of the day, doesn't mean that we can't stop trying. That's the key. And that's the ultimate goal here. And that's why I believe in having this dialogue that kind of brings together that middle ground. So again, thank you, Avery, for coming on. I appreciate your time and effort, and we'd love to have you again to touch on these other concerns. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Please stay safe, and Cage is closed. Take care, everybody. Love you.